veterinarian from Denton, and Andy Hopper, I'm so sorry, Hopper, is a farmer and engineer from Decatur. Okay, thank you so much. All right, I'm gonna turn it over to you, and we'll just start on this end if you don't mind, and I'm gonna let you have a 2-minute opening.
Hey y'all, my name is Andy Hopper. I'm running to be your representative for Texas House. I can just say it. I'm running to be your representative for Texas House District 64. Say a little bit about myself. I'm a software engineer. First of all, I'm joined here with my beautiful wife, Amanda. 24 years. I can do that. Oh, this is quality mic right here. Anyways, I'm joined here with my beautiful wife of 24 years. You know, we actually spent half of our marriage in Wise County and another half in Denton County. We actually raised our kids up. Miles was age 8th grade, and then we actually carted him over to Wise County, started a small farm, and we have raised 3 outstanding conservative young men. A little bit about myself: I'm a software engineer, worked in the defense industry for over a decade and a half. Basically worked on projects like the F-35, F-16, and mission computers, worked in Skunk Works for many years. And I'm also a warrant officer in the Texas State Guard. I enlisted in 2014. It's been a very, very important part of my life. My brotherhood of people down in Austin who actually write software for the Guard. So we've actually written a system that is basically manages all the personnel, recruiting, training, all the aspects of the life and day in the life of any Guardsman. And it's actually now being rolled out to Texas military departments that have been estimated to save the state of Texas no less than $25 million. I'm also a conservative activist. My wife and I, and many others, residents in the room, we actually joined together and started Wise County Conservatives over a year ago. It's turned out to be one of the most successful grassroots organizations in Texas, and it's been very rewarding for us because we've actually found our people. So I'm running for Texas House because I believe that we need strong, unwavering conservatives to stand against lobbyist-funded establishment in Austin, and that's what I will do because I believe that we have an opportunity to save the state, to be able to stand up for our values and values of those who founded our state, established our state at Alamo and San Jacinto. Thank you.
Hello, thank you for being here. I'm Lynn Stuckey. I'm a 39-year veterinarian in the North Texas area, and my lovely wife of almost 35 years in July, 35 years marriage is here with me. We're blessed to have raised our family here, and I've been blessed to have a 9,000 active client base. I was on the school board in Santiago for 15 years. I was on the Executive Chamber Commerce Board. We started Dayton Young Life. I'm currently the president of Kanakuk Institute. So we try to give back to the community we have for many, many years. I'm blessed to represent you now for my 3rd session, and this would be 5 years. And in this last session, we didn't have just 1, but we had 4. So thank you for being here, and I look forward to talking to you more.
That one's a little bit better. Okay, vaccine and mask mandates. You know, we felt like the government was picking and choosing last year who could stay open and who couldn't. Do you believe in, knowing what we know now and being pretty much post-pandemic, do you believe in what we should do about vaccine mandates and possible mask mandates? Let you start.
You want me to start?
Sure, go ahead.
Okay, so let's talk about the vaccine mandates first, because I think that that's actually near and dear to my heart, and it's actually affected a lot of folks in our conservative group. Because the reality is that we actually have told businesses through SB 6 in the first legislative session last year that, in fact, if you follow all of CDC guidelines, every guideline, rule, statute that it comes down from the federal or state levels, you are indemnified. So make no mistake, our state legislature has in fact supported a bill that actually allows employers to basically suffer no consequences from employees that might suffer an adverse reaction. I will tell you, no employer will require a vaccine of an employee if they thought they would be liable. That would be crazy. But it's only that lack of liability that allows them to basically have this carte blanche attitude towards the idea that we can force employees to do anything. But no, we actually need, yesterday, a constitutional amendment in the Texas Bill of Rights that guarantees the right of an employee to not take a vaccine, the right of a Texas citizen not take a vaccine to attend any sort of a place of business, worship, otherwise. It should be totally protected. And totally against mask mandates, so I'm about out of time. But the idea that we can force people to wear clothing over their face, which basically demonizes us, is crazy. It was crazy a year ago, 2 years ago, and it's crazy now.
Any mandates by the federal government or state government, but in this case, federal government, is an overreach of the government. And so, no, we should not have any mandates, not just vaccine, mask mandates, and any other mandates that they try to throw at us. And so, all of those is something that we shouldn't have to deal with in the state of Texas, and we have fought back through the Supreme Court and tried to force it not to do that. But it's a great overreach by the federal government.
This one. Okay, border security is really important to all of us. Let's face it, it's a nightmare right now. The legislature has addressed it last session. Is there more to do? And if you are elected, what would you do to increase address what's happening at the border?
There's a lot more to do. Unfortunately, we went from Trump to Biden. And what we did, the floodgates were open because is it crackling? Prior to Trump, when Trump was there at the very end, we had gotten to the lowest numbers in 3 decades of people crossing. He had a number of policies in place that got it to there. Biden immediately reversed that, and we saw the flood come in. In fact, from January to January, we had 2 million people flooding to our country from Mexico through illegal immigration. So what are we doing? Well, immediately when this happened, it's a very difficult and extensive problem that we started working with the governor and others, and we increased the funding by $3 billion from $800 million, which this is a federal issue, but the state is taking over. And we are now purchasing land from the federal government. We're going to build the border. We're going to have more technology. We're going to have more troops on the ground. And yes, we have a long way to go, but we're starting to turn it. One of the things that's so important is that they stay in Mexico, that they don't get a crossover, that they're required to stay in Mexico, which Biden had reversed and allowed this sudden flood of influx of immigration.
You know, we went down to the border a few weeks ago and we interviewed with a number of immigrants that were, not immigrants, illegals that were basically standing there at the gates waiting to be picked up by the federal agents that were glad to give them shelter, clothing, and transportation. And we asked, did you have any reservation? Do you have any fear whatsoever about crossing the U.S. border? And they said none. Absolutely none. And the reality is that what we're doing on the border is theater. Yes, the federal government has failed us, but the reality is for most of Texas history, the federal government has been failing Texas on its southern border. That is not a new situation. And in the absence of that state, the state of Texas absolutely has to stand up and protect our border, as we have for most of our history. Now, Article 1, Section 10 is a provision of the U.S. Constitution that gives the states the ability to protect themselves against invasion. And as crazy as that sounds, the governor of Arizona just brought this up 2 days ago and said that, in fact, we have met the test to recognize the border issue as an invasion, and gives the state the ability, through its war powers authority, to be able to resist that invasion. So the Texas legislature should immediately invoke Article 1, Section 10, and direct the governor to take operational control of the entire Texas border. Our troops are not given the authority to actually do anything to impede their progress over the border. That has to change. We need real rules of engagement for our National Guardsmen, because they're basically just making sense.
One of the other things that has always been near and dear to Republicans' hearts is election integrity. The legislature went back several times to work on this one. They got a lot of things done. Are you happy with what's been passed? Do we need more? Should it be addressed again this next session? I think we start with Mr. Halper.
Yeah, so no, we didn't get as far as we wanted. In fact, we actually ended up reducing the penalty for illegal voting from a felony to a misdemeanor. That has to be rectified ASAP. But the reality is that We need to have trust in our elections. The thing that makes the difference between Texas and Mexico is the fact that Mexico is a tin pot dictatorship because they don't trust anything about their government. It is required in a free society for us to trust the institutions of government, and trusting the voting process is paramount. As a software engineer, I will tell you there is not a possibility of any system to exist that is not hackable. That is not a thing. So the reality is we have to move back to a paper ballot system because it's an accessible system that we can interpret. I can't tell you what the state of a microscopic semiconductor was 10 seconds ago, but I can look at a ballot and see whether or not there's a hanging check. So we have to move back to a system that we can have average citizens participate in. We do not employ cybersecurity experts in the state of Texas to look into our election apparatus. But we also need to, as well, consider the fact that we need to have an election system that is basically free of any sort of questions that we might have as citizens, and have every election basically be a questionable outcome. We have to have an election process and reasonable penalties that are actually put in place to basically say, and I would point out that our Texas legislature actually passed at the end of the third session a resolution to say that illegal voting is not a crime if you thought that you were voting legally.
Election integrity is of utmost importance, and we did pass an election integrity bill that made it easier to vote and harder to cheat. Now, like any other election, any other legislation, many times you got to continue to tweak it. And so there are things that we'll go back and we'll tweak, just like everything else that we pass and everything that we passed in the past. So we'll continue to work on that, but we have made it a lot easier to vote and a lot harder to cheat.
The crime rate in Texas, especially in our urban areas, is growing at an exponential rate. What can the Texas legislature do to address the crime rates in Texas?
The first thing is never to fund any police department, period. And we have passed some laws to make it more difficult for municipalities to do that. And in most of the cases, it's Austin and Houston and the big cities that are having these issues. We continue to work on that. And then again, we're talking, and many of the issues we talked about earlier, and I heard the questions earlier, goes back to local control in our who we vote in the city, who we vote in on our school board. All those things are extremely important, including safety.
Running for office is very enlightening because as a part of our block walking experience, we've actually knocked on a number of doors of rural landowners that will tell you that they had to call the sheriff because there was actually an illegal camped out in their back pasture. That is actually a problem in North Texas. So the number one thing we can do to alleviate our crime rate in Texas is to basically take care of our border. Because so much of the trafficking and drugs that basically brought us, we're basically kind of kidding ourselves when we're saying that we have so many folks that are on drug-related charges in prison that are there because of drugs that were actually smuggled across the border. If we're not willing to close the border and to secure it, we are not willing to actually address these core issues that are basically driving our crime rate up. But we absolutely also have to declare in one voice in the state of Texas that human trafficking should be a capital crime. So much of what's going on is driven off of the fact that the cartels are actively operating in the state of Texas. When folks cross the border, it's not like they get lost in the system. The cartels know where they are because the cartels are operating in the state of Texas very much the way that they operate in Mexico. There are counties in Texas where the citizens live in fear of the cartels. So, number one thing we got to do is close the border, secure it.
This is our final question, but I'm going to go back to education. As I think education is going to be one of the hot button issues in the next legislative session, both what's going on curriculum-wise and funding, school choice. What is your feeling on education and funding of education?
Was that it? Well, okay. So, people are concerned about education in a way that they've never before been. I mean, that is literally the number one question that I get door to door is what are we going to do about the fact that our kids are being indoctrinated? The parents, the greatest thing about COVID, if there was anything good about it, is that parents finally learned what was going on with their kids' minds because they were stuck at home with them. And actually, that happy outcome has caused an involvement, a civic engagement level that we have not seen in my lifetime. Folks in school boards, I actually had one lady that I knocked on her door, and she said, I hate all these conservatives that are coming to our school board meetings. She says, we need to put a stop to that. They should not be able to affect our school boards. No lie, it was an actual conversation. So the reality is that there are things that we can do at the state level to help our local school boards basically succeed. Number one is that we need to stop the process of indoctrinating our teachers as they're going through school by providing a process to review this horde of regents that are basically running these communist indoctrination facilities called universities. Number two is we need to move back to paper textbooks. But you know what Mr. Younger mentioned a minute ago is the fact that it's impossible to evaluate your curriculum, but it's very easy to read a book. So when it's digital format, sitting there going through all the little choose your own adventure scenarios to figure out what is actually in that digital curriculum is impossible for an average parent. So we need to move back to a paper curriculum, a paper textbook system.
I'm the product of public education, and 93% of the students in this state go through public education. I'm also 100% behind the parents' choice on what they want to do on a day-to-day basis. We had one that was dyslexic, and we had they all were different, so we had to make a choice on a day-to-day. But we have to have a minimum quality public education. I was one of 6. My dad died when I was of a brain tumor when I was 11. My mom raised us, and she said, you will know Jesus, number one, and she did by example. And number 2, you will get a college degree, and she made sure that happened. And we were blessed because of that. But part of that is having a quality minimum quality education K through 12, and I got that. Again, we go back to school boards, we go back to local control, and we go back to parental involvement. All of those are extremely important. And yes, we have more and more issues in our public schools and everywhere else. And part of that, I really believe, is because of the breakdown of the family, the whole family situation. There's a lot more single parent family members there that are just trying to pay their light bill than there used to be, where you had 2 of them involved. So we need to stay involved. We need to have that opportunity to be flexible on what you want for your child, but we also have to have a quality public education.
Okay, now we'll move to our 2-minute close and start with Dr. Stucky.
Thank you again for being here. I'm honored and blessed to be here. I'm honored and blessed to represent District 64 for the last 3 sessions and basically the last 5 years. We passed landmark legislation. We passed recently the heartbeat bill, which is the most conservative pro-life bill ever. We passed constitutional carry. We did help improve the election integrity. We still got a ways to go on that one. We never had that question, but there is a ways to go, especially when you're growing. You have 30 million people. And we've done many different things, but we've got a lot of work to go back and do, including work on property tax relief, on other issues that are still there, and tweak some of the things that we've passed. So thank you for allowing me to speak today. Thank you for being here. Thank you for carrying LynnStuckey.com. I appreciate your vote. Again, Valentine's Day on Monday starts voting, and primaries is March 1st. Thank you.
Thank you all for having me tonight. This has been an excellent forum, and I've had a really, really good time. So here's one thing that I think that folks need to recognize in the state of Texas is that 600 bills, over 600 bills were passed last legislative session. And in fact, of those 600 bills, 45% of the language merely moved federal statute into state statute. And there is a very strong case to be made that we conservatives must stand against the avalanche of legislation. Voting no on legislation is a good thing, because so much of it is actually the federalization of our state sovereignty. So I also want to point out that we have these legislative priorities that are laid down by our Republican Party of Texas, and these legislative priorities include things like school choice. School choice is something that didn't even get lip service this past session. There was nothing passed that was valuable for school choice.
And I also want to point out that the stat that my opponent has mentioned a number of times, that 93% is inaccurate. In fact, it's 81% as of 2022 of students in Texas are in public school. The incidence of homeschoolers has increased by 300% in 2 years. So real school choice is something that we have to have, and it's actually called money. That we need to strive for a system where the money actually follows the child. We actually have monument protection as a legislative priority. We saw nothing to save our monuments. We also have executive overreach. Our legislature actually voted to expand Governor Abbott's emergency authority, not to curb the executive overreach. So we need to stand for Texas. We need to stand for the ideals of self-government, of state sovereignty, that are basically a hallmark of the state. Texas should lead the nation, but instead we're following a state like Florida. It is up to our legislators to stand up for these ideals that are so quintessential to this place we call home, Texas. I appreciate your vote. HopperForTexas.com.
Thank you for your time and your treasure and your talent for wanting to give it to Texas, because we certainly do appreciate it. So, now Mary, if you would